Hi, everyone. Welcome to this week's edition of The Gathering. It is Valentine's week, and so I wanted to have not my cohort, but my cohort.
Ah,
So cheesy. For Valentine's week. Plus, it's his birthday week. And first of all, I'm just grateful for friends who have mountain cabins
this place is amazing.
in the North Georgia mountains, who are generous enough and kind enough to let us use it for the weekend. And so, in celebration of your birth and all things love, we're just going to dive right in and talk about the disciplines, not just of love, the disciplines of love. That sounds weird, but the disciplines around self love. In fact, I'm going to do a 90-minute class this week around that. And one of those disciplines is around our relationship to fear. Why? Because if we are not aware or conscious of the degree of which our fears kind of run our lives, then we're also not conscious or aware of the way in which that inhibits the experience of loving the self, because we're sort of acting on the surface. I want to say we're not confusing self-love practices, self-care practices, but that's really a surface thing. What we're talking about is the primordial, the real deep understanding of honoring self, capital S self, and the discipline that is required to do that, or the disciplines that assist us in doing that. And so fear is one of the things that is a barrier. And I use the word discipline because I'm borrowing your word of the year.
He stole it.
Thief. So the word discipline is your word of the year. And so when you break that word down and you look at the roots, like disciple, what does it mean to be a disciple of something? To be a devotee, to devote one's attention and the embodiment of personal practice to something. And so to be in discipline of one's self-love is to be willing to look at, what am I afraid of? It's just a kind of a long-winded way to get around to that. But what am I afraid of, and why? Why am I afraid of certain things, right?
Well, David, talk a few minutes more, though, about how you see the relationship between fear and love, and the ways that what do you mean when you're talking about your expression of love and how fear gets in the way? Because you had a nice way of.
I don't remember what I said.
Well, I think what you said was it was like a fear blocks the artery.
Yeah.
So like if love is a flow,
and love just is.
love is, and your this thing is processing, the inputs in and expression out. So my body, my makeup, the how I grew up, my programming, all the things that I am, my chemical makeup. And then life occurs, and life just occurs. Like if you look at a bird, they're just flowing, doing their thing. But our brains are very complicated things. And so then when we have an impulse, sometimes those impulses don't flow through because of whatever usually almost always fear, right?
And that's what fear is doing. It's blocking the natural expression and experience of love.
Right.
So what I would add to that is, just because we're operating on fear does not mean that love is absent, because love can't be absent. So fear then is a conscious or an unconscious choice to put a blanket over, or to bury the ability to recognize love. And so again, to be in the discipline of cultivating, nurturing self-love, love of self, is to be able and be willing to go into the arena of examining our fears.
Right.
So, what is it? What are you afraid of? And everybody is of something. And so it doesn't mean that we're doing something wrong. You could say that it's just a natural part of being human. But how does one then transcend fear? And really, I feel that there's only one true effective way, and it is to face it, but not just face it from an intellectual standpoint, but to actually go into it, go into the arena of what it is that you're afraid of, and then make conscious choices and deliberate actions to cohabitate in the sort of the sandbox of that fear, in order to begin to see its mythology, in order to see that it has no basis other than what the mind gives it. And so over coffee this morning, when we were staring out into the rain misty mountains around us, I was saying, so what is some of, when I say, what are you afraid of? You came up with a really potent and timely one. Do you remember which one?
Mm-hmm. I'll probably not, let me try to give it its due. Well, I think that what came immediately to mind was my historic fear of other people's pain. And so when I would see pain, a friend's parent would die or something like that, I would freeze up inside and feel super like just back away from helping or reaching out, for a whole host of reasons that were under there. And so the top surface was, I was just terrified, or whatever was the feeling, and I just not approach.
And then you just go right to the question then, why is that?
Right.
Like when you remove all the layers, what is the primal granular reason why you would freeze?
I have nothing to give.
Okay.
And so
the fear,
deep inadequacy.
Okay. So the fear in there, that is the blanket of being disciplined and honoring and loving self, is that at some core, you believe that you are inadequate to do so.
Right.
And so one of the tactics or behavioral choices is then to avoid anything that would put you in the position to be adequate, not just adequate, but operative,
right,
and conscious. And the reason why I loved the rawness of that is because I hear that and I witness that and I read about that a lot from people. I just was reading something this week about a woman saying her child had died, and how lonely the neighboring people around her, that experience has been, because people are avoiding her. And she realizes it's probably because they don't know what to say. And yet it was this idea that makes the situation even more isolated and lonely. And so the real thing then about that, and the beauty, so fear is an invitation. It's not something to turn away from, it's something to turn to. It's an invitation to go, what is at the root of this? And so when we were talking, at the root of yours was this sense of inadequacy. So then how do you approach inadequacy? What would you do?
Well, I mean, I think the design is perfect, right? Because I didn't jump at that time when I started to realize this about myself, and decided I wanted to be somebody different. I mean, the impetus for it is that it felt awful to turn away from people. I didn't like how that made me, I mean, I did not like that part of me. And
Mm-hmm.
so the design, I think, is pretty good because I didn't jump right to inadequacy. First, there were many other
Right.
layers of things that came up, like, oh, I'm going to get overwhelmed by this person's, like I'm going to drown in their need, so that I
Which is
had
like a
like,
costume of inadequacy.
yeah,
Okay.
well, I mean, so the root of that is still inadequacy, but
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh gosh, I'm going to get overwhelmed and I'm not going to have the resources to continue to help them. So there were a lot of misconceptions too, like what is my responsibility? So we were talking this morning too about, first I had to realize that pain is
Mm.
that it's not we're all holding pieces of the pain.
Yeah. So we were saying how one of the great misconceptions is that we're all walking around and we're going, well, my pain is, or my neuroses is, or my story is. And the challenge with that, what makes that difficult to surmount, is we're taking ownership of something that is just the collective. So instead of saying my pain, it's the pain, the pain. I'm experiencing the collective pain that humans experience. I'm experiencing a part of the yin yang dynamic that right now only sees the darkness. And what is liberating about that, and what is a beautiful part of the discipline of self love, is to stop identifying with inadequacy as if you are that,
Mhm.
because that is the greatest piece of the misconception. Is now I have identified as that. And so one of the disciplines is to extricate oneself from identifying with those things, and labeling and saying, I am this, I am that, with regards to anything that is separate or diminished. And
And
realizing that what I'm witnessing in that person's situation right now is a part of the collective pain. And we're not, or I'm not, or the goal isn't to diminish their experience, but to hold in understanding that um, we all are going to be in that position.
yes.
Rhythmically, ebb and flow. We will experience loss the way that they are experiencing loss. We will experience illness the way that they are experiencing illness. We will experience rejection the way that they're experiencing rejection. And so we're not bonding in the identity of that thing as much as we are wanting to create common ground in loving and understanding them where they are.
Exactly. To become clear that it wasn't for me to remove, change, fix.
Which would be overwhelming.
It's super overwhelming.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Of course, I'd be inadequate to do that, but I don't have to do that. So
Mm-hmm.
that was a big revelation. And so, like peeling away just all the different trendles to that inadequacy. Um, and then you can get to the inadequacy and say, well, wait a second, that first it, whatever I have to offer here
Mm-hmm.
is enough,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
And that then is a part of the discipline, is that awareness. Whatever it is that I have to offer is enough because I am enough, or because I am a part of
It.
love, the solution, and not from an arrogance, but from an ownership that I can just simply come in and be in that space. You know, it's like I was sharing with you, and I went with a friend to his oncologist appointment, and it was the meeting where they said, we have no more options for you. They're still going to participate in one more clinical trial, but the doctor was very clear that the cancer was prominent. And so the clinical trial isn't the cure, it's just to buy some time. And so to be in that space and to be in that room and to hear that with them, um, I I knew I knew that my role wasn't to create artificiality or to say things that were just, platitudes, but to just be with him and to hold his hand and to um, breathe with him and to let him know that in that moment, he didn't have to be anything or pretend to be anything. We could just share that moment together. And it's interesting because I would think that having been in your space as well from time to time, that wouldn't have been enough. Mm-hmm. That my job in that moment would have been to fix it. And that, so my thing was always um, my responsibility is to fix it. And so my greatest fear was not to be able to fix it for other people. But woven in with that was an avoidance mechanism, because as long as I was focused on fixing the problems of other people, then I didn't have to look at my own inadequacy, my own just such deeply buried lack of worth. So the way in which I was trying to taste worth or experience worth was through the product of fixing other people. And that is not sustainable, nor is it a reality, because first of all, you can't do that. We don't have the power to do that. And then when the fixing doesn't work, or the response isn't what we expect, then there is resentment there. And so you start to see the toxicity of that cycle. And so the fear of my inadequacy is, well, if I don't fix it, then I have no value. Oof. So you start to see that we all have a little bit of that. Come on. We all have a little bit of that, because that's part of the fabric. It's part of the assignment, if you will, of agreeing to come in and take an incarnated body, that you're going to have to journey through all of these little tentacles of separation and the way in which they exhibit themselves, which come about us, culturally and from the origin of our religions and whatnot. And so the discipline of self-love is to be able to free fall into the curiosity, the examination, and the ultimate relinquishing ourselves to the identity of all of those things. Mm. Right?
Yeah.
And so today, let's say, the fear of pain and being inadequate for someone's pain, what would you I know it's a hypothetical, but what would you choose to do if you were focused on the discipline of loving yourself as adequate or enough in those moments of pain?
Right. Well, and I think it's important to say that the discipline is not a punitive discipline, because that doesn't work.
Right. Yes.
So, if I were to be like, well, you're just such a jerk, you never call people, like that is just more of the same crap. That's not going to get me anywhere.
So this is really not self-care, small s self-care. This is capital S, the care of self. Right.
Right.
And so the discipline is to turn to and recognize and just give space and breath to self-care, the love of self.
Yeah.
And to go,
wow, I'm really afraid. right now.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, so when this was all coming to light really clearly for me was a few years ago, and a good family friend that I had known for years, his brother threw himself off of a
Mm.
interstate bridge, really violent death. And I recognized that I had some resources that I hadn't had before, because I think I started to have that framework of like, wow, he is carrying a really big part of the pain right in this moment. And it was such a big one that I knew I couldn't help him really. And so I was able to see like, okay, you're terrified. This is one of those ones, and it just was one of many, but it was such a big one that it was kind of easier to see
Mm-hmm.
that while you're really feeling completely inadequate, and as you should, you are inadequate here. You're not going to be able to help him, but what can you do? And so I was inviting myself into kind of a just baby steps into um, reaching out, and I made it a conscious exercise and opening to that pain, and just allowing myself to just be in that pain with him, and not try to take it away or hold, say any, it is one of those things of the in the ecology, with the cancer,
Mm-hmm.
there's nothing you can do. So there, it relieved me of uh, I think this thought that I could do something, which is an important thing to learn, is that many times we're not there to fix it. And so, does that make sense? It was a gentleness with myself to just do what I had to available to me to do in that moment, a text or a phone call, or like, and then eventually I was like, okay, I'm gonna ask if he would like to have lunch, and I brought some food, and we just talked, and it was amazing.
Mm.
And so to move through the fear just slowly, with examination of what was going on in my mind and my heart at each step of outreach to that person, was a really powerful growth for me. And you say often, you have to be in a situation in order to make good. It's like, it's one thing to intellectualize it, and it's another thing to be in a
Right.
situation and practice. So,
I mean, this is such a huge topic, the topic of collective pain and how are we supposed to be. So don't confuse this with instruction manual of how to do it, but to recognize that that is there and it will always be there. It will always be there. And if you are afraid of pain, um, and afraid that you aren't enough, um, then that is something to lean into. Because again, if the main point here is to not turn away from the fear, but to turn to the fear, as you were reminding us, is that then the best way to become disciplined in understanding that fear just is. And fear will always cycle back. This isn't a course or a talk on how to abolish fear, because that will never happen. Fear is a rhythmic, cyclical thing that is a part of being human, no matter how advanced we are. I become afraid, and in it, I don't even think of it in those terms. But if I was really to sit down with it, I still become afraid at rejection.
mm.
Around asking. So sometimes I will procrastinate in asking, and I have to say, why are you procrastinating? And it's because I am anticipating rejection, and I'm afraid of that.
Mm.
And everything within me bristles at the possibility of that. And so, solution is, then what do? You ask anyway. You ask in the not locked into the result, but then you make asking a practice.
Good.
You ask anyway, not again uh, for results, and in equating success with the results, but in the practice of dissolving the fear. So for you, the pain. And so instead of avoiding painful situations or painful conversations because you feel like inadequate, or crossing the street in avoidance of certain things, you walk towards the pain, not with the instruction manual of this is the proper way to do it, but to just go towards it anyway. And then to allow ourselves to organically become whatever is needed in that moment, even if we feel like we're not enough, you see. And so that's really, I think we should do a little series on the disciplines of self-love. And this first one is fear and going towards your fear. So we'll leave you with this today. Write down, and this is going to be a part of the little 90-minute thing we do on February 15th, is to write down what it is that you're afraid of. Just write it down. Don't continue to keep it up here. Like, write it down and look at it and go, and then say, what is that about? What is the origin of that? All origin is enoughness and or the belief in separation. But then what will you do to go into the arena of the fear in order to begin to facilitate the dismantling or the identity of it? And I do want, we talked about this morning too, and I do want to mention this, that it's very seductive to identify with your fears, to go around and say, like, this is my neuroses, as if it's a medal or an accomplishment. I am this, and then label yourself as some abnormality or something that is less than, whether it's some new 21st century diagnostic term, and oh yeah, I'm that, which actually becomes an excuse. But to begin to look at the seduction of wanting to identify yourself in order to let ourselves off of the hook from the real discipline of honoring the self, if that makes sense. Happy birthday.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. I feel so loved.
Happy Valentine's Day.
Happy Valentine's Day, everyone.
Happy journey to becoming more and more the disciple that you already are in honoring and loving the capital S self of you. Till next time. Namaste.